Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is the fourth and the fifth of the Women's Studies in Religion public lectures for this academic year, 2011 and 12. Our speaker today is Dr. Rachel Adelman, who is visiting lecturer on women's studies and Hebrew literature this year. Rachel did her graduate study in Jerusalem with an MA in Tanakh from the Matan Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Matan is the Sadie Bennett Women's Institute for Torah Study, and she earned her PhD in Hebrew literature with a specialty in Midrash from Hebrew University. Just to make us all a little bit linguistically jealous, I have to tell you that Rachel has competency in Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, Syriac, Latin, Hebrew, French, and Spanish, as well as English. In 2007 and 2008, Rachel served as the Roy D. Wolf Postdoctoral Fellow in Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto, and last year was visiting assistant professor at Miami University in Ohio. Rachel is an accomplished scholar and writer. Her first book, The Return of the Repressed, is it Pirkei or Pirk?
Pirkei de Rabbi.
De Rabbi Eliezer and the Pseudepigrapha was published by Brill in 2009. Her second academic book is the project for which she is a WSRP Fellow this year. It's entitled The Female Ruse, Women's Deception and Divine Sanction in the Hebrew Bible, and I think we'll be hearing a bit more about that today. Rachel is also a published poet whose works have appeared in the volume European Judaism, and she's published translations of poetry in modern Hebrew literature. She now has a grant from the Hadassah Brandeis Institute to work on her first book of creative writing entitled A Voice from the End of the World, Selected Poems and Midrashim. We will have Rachel as a next-door neighbor next year as she starts a tenure-track position as professor of Hebrew Bible at Hebrew College in Newton on the campus of Andover Newton Theological School. We will hear Rebekah speaking today on Reading Rebekah Unveiled, a study of the female Ruse in Genesis. It's a great pleasure to welcome Rachel Adelman to this podium.
Thank you all for coming on this gorgeous March day. Unprecedented sunny weather we're on the verge of spring, right? March 1st was spring, and it's been a privilege to be a WSRP scholar this year, and I'm grateful to Jacob Rhodes for his cheering us on, and Jane for the generous introduction, and my colleagues who have given me a lot of feedback over the course of the year on my writing. I want to begin with a quote from Oscar Wilde. He once wrote, "Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask, and he will tell you the truth. The truth the writer alludes to is an alternative truth, which the given identity of face and name cannot convey. A deeper truth that can only emerge through subterfuge." Biblical plots of subterfuge entail a journey under, below the surface of things, subter in Latin, and also a flight from reality or an escape, fugere. The focus of my book project this year at WSRP, as the title suggests, will be on the truth that emerges through female ruse in the Hebrew Bible. Consider, for example, the daughters of Lot lying with their drunken father, the sisters Leah and Rachel in collusion on Jacob's wedding night, Naomi sending Ruth to the threshing floor to seduce Boaz by night, Esther in the imperial court of Ahasuerus, and of course my favorite, Tamar's seduction of Judah, her father-in-law. In these gendered tales of subterfuge, The female trickster often seduces the man under dubious circumstances, thereby gaining the upper hand against her male counterpart, who otherwise holds the reins of power. Wendy Doniger has aptly dubbed these stories of deception the bed trick. Sex with a partner whose identity is somehow obscured. They take place in the most private sphere of encounter, in the bedroom or tent where identities may shift in the dark. What is most striking about these tales of feminine wile in the Bible is that the divine will allies with the women. The question is, why? What role does the female ruse play in forwarding the divine plot? While my discussion is not restricted to sexual encounters, the stories do hinge upon knowledge concealed in the recesses of the female body, the site of conception and pregnancy. In the womb, the identity of the father is only known for certain by the woman and the omniscient deity. Anxiety over paternity indirectly underscores these narratives of deception, granting the heroine an advantage in the realm of knowing, carnal and otherwise. It is the inner workings of God through the woman's body that beckons the question, what does she know that the man does not? And why is this knowledge withheld from him? In this talk today, I use as my paradigmatic example the story of Rebekah. I hope to draw a connection between the scene when Rebekah first saw Isaac in the distance, fell from her camel, and then covered her face with a veil, and the subsequent truth that she comes to know, that Jacob should be the heir to the patriarchal covenant. This is the truth that ironically prompts deceit, compels the matriarch to dress her favorite son in goat skins, claiming before his blind old father, I am Esau, your firstborn. Jacob becomes the quintessential dissembler, the man of masks, assuming an ironic posture. Yet Jacob learns the art of dissembling, the art of masks from his mother. My central question is, why did the blessing have to come through a ruse? Why subterfuge? So what I'd like to start off with is a view of the forest before we climb up the tree. The overriding concern in the book of Genesis revolves around the transition from one generation of males to the next, expressed by the key word toledot, literally begetting. The term toledot, variously translated as genealogy, generations, line, descendants, or lineage, derives from the root yud lamed daled, to generate, to give birth, or to beget. It is always found in the plural, most often preceded by a demonstrative pronoun. Ele toledot, these are the generations, or these are the descendants of. And it appears at 10 significant points in the book of Genesis, each time marking off a distinct narrative cycle. The first, the heavens and the earth. The second, Adam. The third, Noah. And notice, suddenly we have an anomaly. Noah's sons, Shem, Terach, Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, and Jacob. In addition, there are 2 addenda to the Toledot series accounting for the election of the Levitical clan and the lineage of the Davidic monarchy, Toledot Peretz. With the exception of the generations of the heaven and the earth, the expression gestures forwards to the descendants that follow the paternal line. In chapters 10 and 11 of Genesis, known as the Table of Nations, the pattern opens with the naming of the father, his age at the birth of his firstborn, trailing off into a summation of the years he had lived after the birth of his heir, perhaps with a byline about his other inconsequential and unnamed offspring. For example, these are the begettings, number 5. These are the begettings of Shem, toledot Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Aparshad 2 years after the flood, and Shem lived after the birth of Aparshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters, and so forth, from Aparshad to Shelach, to Ever, to Peleg, until we arrive at the genealogy of Terach. It is as if the birth of the next generation implied the death of the previous one. The son metaphorically brings about the demise of the father, who will then also die when his son is born. These lists constitute essentially an anti-narrative, a refusal to tell the story about all those dying generations. By contrast, the patriarchal narrative cycles open with a formula which defies the formulaic. Toledot Terach, number 6, Isaac, number 8, and Jacob, number 10. Toledot Avraham is conspicuously absent. The designated father of many nations does not have his own Toledot. Rather, his genealogy is subsumed under the lineage of his father Terach. This is peculiar to each of the 3 series introducing the patriarchs. Toledot Terach introduces the Abraham cycle. Toledot Yitzchak introduces Jacob's saga. And Toledot Yaakov introduces the saga of Joseph and his brothers. Furthermore, the simple progression from father to son is subject to disequilibrium, thwarted continuity, either through barrenness, ubiquitous among the matriarchs, or as a result of doubts as to who should be the rightful heir. Let us consider the opening of the Jacob cycle, introduced as Toledot Yitzchak. This is the first source on your page. It contains an additional peculiarity. Now these are the begettings of Isaac, Toledot Yitzchak, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Why does the verse not lead directly into, and Isaac was 40 years old when he begot Jacob and Esau? Instead of a list of his sons, as in the genealogy of Ishmael or Esau, the verse curls back upon itself, asserting twice that Isaac is the son of Abraham, begotten by Abraham. The unequivocal assertion of Abraham's fathering of Isaac points us in an alternative direction. Instead of launching into a list of Isaac's descendants, the focus shifts to the identity of the father. Earlier, I noted that Toledot Avraham is conspicuously absent. His saga is subsumed under Toledot Terach. In the story that follows, Toledot Yitzchak, focus is placed on the next generation, with the birth of Esau and Jacob, Isaac's twins. The conundrum revolves around who will be chosen for the covenantal blessing. Perhaps this is the Toledot Avraham that is missing from the list of 10 Toledot in Genesis. It is as though Isaac serves merely as the bridge between Abraham, the first of the patriarchs, and Jacob, the third. In the words of Everett Fox, Isaac functions in Genesis as a classic second generation, that is, as a transmitter and stabilizing force, rather than as an active participant in the process of building the people. After a mere 2 chapters, he fades out of the text entirely, only to die several chapters and many years later. Though Isaac earns his own genealogy, he has a Toledot. It is essentially Abraham's and functions as the segue into the Jacob saga. Rather than a list of begats, a non-story, a refusal to tell about all those dying generations, Toledot modulates into narrative, as we are privy to a very complicated transition from father to son, or rather, from grandfather to grandson. Rebekah plays a key role in that transition. At the age of 40, Isaac marries Rebekah. We are not told her age. Midrashic lore says she's 3, but unlikely. A barren period of 2 decades passes, but no maidservant is procured. In contrast to Abraham and Jacob, who conceived sons by the rival wife, rather than remain childless, Isaac does not acquire a rival to Rebekah. Instead, there is an appeal to God, and Isaac prayed to the Lord in the presence of his wife, for she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer. Rebekah, his wife, conceived. He is the first man in Genesis of whom it is said that he loved his wife, in chapter 24, verse 66. And he is the only one to entreat God on her behalf when she is deemed by the narrative to be barren. Furthermore, of all the stories of barren women, Sarah, Rachel, Hannah, the woman of Shunem, and Samson's mother, God here responds uniquely to the husband's prayer in granting Rebekah conception. Despite the effective appeal to God and the seeming synergy between husband and wife, Isaac's relationship with Rebekah is fraught with lack of communication and later duplicity on her part. Signs of a rift surface when she initiates contact with God during her pregnancy. It is strikingly the only biblical pregnancy. Usually we hear the seamless, she conceived and she gave birth, vatahar v'taled. But complications in gestation prompt her, in the words of Aviva Zornberg, to become the first biblical character to go in quest of God. The children struggled together within her womb, bikirba. So she said, if this is so, why do I exist? Lama ze anochi, and she went to inquire of the Lord. Rebekah experiences something unusual, an intrauterine conflict, though she may not yet know she carries twins. This struggle in the room, that is, this is before they have ultrasounds. The struggle in the womb suggests that the rivalry over the birthright begins in utero and serves as foreshadowing for the events that will ensue, the complications in acquiring the birthright and blessing. For Rebekah, it entails a keen sense of the gap between the outward smoothness of her belly's skin and the inner tumult. Given the intensity of her experience, why does she not first appeal to her husband, Isaac, before turning to God, as Sarah confronted Abraham in the case of Hagar, or as Rachel appealed to Jacob in distress over her own barrenness? Classic rabbinic commentary reflects an uneasiness over Rebekah's direct consultation of God. Rashi, for example, suggests that she went to Shem's house of study, Beit Midrash Shel Shem. Maybe the rabbis are uncomfortable with her direct appeal because of the consequences. She comes to know more than her husband about the divine plan. Perhaps her quest is essentially of a feminine nature, the gynecological sort, which her husband cannot answer. Her tone implies urgency. Lama ze anochi? Why this me? Or why is this happening to me? Ibn Ezra suggests that she consults other women. And when they deny having had such an experience in pregnancy, she feels compelled to appeal to God. Then why am I beset with an unusual pregnancy? Rashi, on the other hand, understands her question as arising from a profound perplexity, a sense of purpose undermined. If the pain of this pregnancy is so great, why did I pray and desire conception so fervently? Perhaps she does not appeal to Isaac because of the unusual nature of her pangs. The meaning must come from God. Aviva Zornberg, drawing on Ramban's reading, understands Rebekah's appeal as an existential crisis. Why I? This is at the top of page 2. It is a quest for meaning as to why she exists in the world altogether. Her cri de coeur is comparable to Job's lament. Why did I not die at birth, expire as I came forth from the womb? Or in chapter 10, why did you let me come out of the womb. Better had I expired before any eye saw me. Had I been as though I never was. Had I been carried from the womb to the grave. In surveying the use of the interrogative, why, lama, Zornberg suggests that it often opens a rhetorical question. Why did Sarah laugh? Or, why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in the desert? Or, my God, why have you forsaken me? Or, why do you hide your face from me? That is, if read rhetorically, Rebekah's question implies that it would have been better had she never been born. The question then is not simply about why this is happening to me, but expresses a death wish, even in the throes of the intensity of her vital pregnant self. Unlike Job, however, who wishes the womb had been his tomb, Rebekah is the womb, the belly, the entrails. She not only questions her natal condition, but is the body in which human life uncannily originates. In that state, she is keenly aware of the simultaneous presence and absence of meaning, the will to undo it all in the very act of gestation. Does God's answer reassure her that there is meaning behind the severe pangs of her pregnancy and the angst it engenders? And the Lord said to her, 2 nations in your womb, 2 peoples from your belly shall be divided. 1 people over the other people shall prevail, and the elder shall serve the younger. V'rav yavod seir. The oracle as a poem reveals the future gradually, as layers of knowledge peeled away. First, there are twins who will emerge as 2 separate nations. As 2 peoples, they will be divided, but not peaceably. Rule one over the other, and servitude one to the other will ensue. Suspense is only relieved in the last line. The younger brother, as a nation, shall rule over the elder. Is this meant to reassure Rebekah about her anxiety? Does it answer her existential quest for meaning? It certainly explains the struggle in her womb, the rivalry between the brothers over the birthright. What sets Rebekah apart at this point is her insight into the discrepancy between the outer norms, that is, the election of the firstborn, and the inner truth of the divine plan. She also exemplifies the difficulty in externalizing that inner truth, carried in the tumult of her womb, Bekirba. In fact, her name, Rivka, can be read as an anagram for the Hebrew term kirba, meaning her innards. The tension between God's internal plot, as forwarded by women, and the best-laid plans of men is exemplified by the near-ubiquitous biblical motif of the overturn of primogeniture. Jacob's displacement of Esau is the paragon example of the usurpation of the right of the firstborn by the younger son. In Deuteronomy chapter 21, it states explicitly that the firstborn shall inherit a double portion, even if he is the son of the despised wife. Yet, as Robert Alter points out, the firstborn son very often seems to be the loser in Genesis by the very condition of his birth. Isaac is selected, while Ishmael is excluded from the covenant. And Jacob acquires the birthright and blessing, displacing Esau. This process of selection does not hinge on merit. Jacob, after all, is chosen by God in utero. The recurrent theme illustrates a broader theological principle in which divine election is set at odds with legal or social norms. Over the course of these narratives of selection, 2 perspectives are set in high relief. As Mayer Sternberg argues, one view is oriented to the internal, the other to external givens, norms, and probabilities. In the Jacob-Esau conundrum, Rebekah is privy to that internal principle. Like God, quote, who sees not as mortals see, they see through the eyes, but God looks to the heart, unquote. She alone is given insight into the divine plan. Isaac, on the other hand, in favoring Esau, sees only as mortals see, though ironically he is purblind. The struggle of the twins in the womb continues into the birth scene. And I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time. You can ask me later. The rift between Isaac and Rebekah begins from the moment that the divine oracle introduces a discrepancy between their perspectives. And it widens, this is the displacement of the firstborn by the younger son, and it widens when Isaac, as a blind old man, resolves to bless his son Esau, not knowing how soon he will die. In fact, he lives on for many centuries until the age of 180. So his anticipation of his death is badly timed. Rebekah is sidelined from the process of bestowing the blessing. She merely overhears Isaac asking Esau to hunt for game and to prepare savory food for him to eat, so that he might bless the heir apparent before he dies. Accordingly, the question has perplexed many scholars as to why Rebekah never told her husband at that point of the oracle that the elder shall serve the younger. She might have drawn her husband aside with these cooing words, "But dear, you are mistaken. It is Jacob who should be the heir to the covenantal blessing." Perhaps in response to being shunted, she changes her husband's words. He had said, "Prepare a dish for me such as I like and bring it to me to eat, so that mine own body soul may bless you before I die." In Hebrew, it's "Ba'avur tevarecha nafshi b'terem amut." But she says, "I heard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you in the presence of the Lord, lifnei yudke vavke, before I die.'" She invokes the presence of God, the tetragrammaton. This blessing is going to come from a place on high. She assures him, when her son expresses anxiety that his father may curse him, saying, "Let your curse be upon me, my son." Thrice she urges her son to listen to her words, "Shma b'koli." By contrast, Sarah appealed to Abraham directly to banish that slave woman and her son when she saw Ishmael sporting with Isaac. As Judy Klitzner points out, God endorsed Sarah's harsh decision in a direct speech to Abraham. "Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her voice. Shema b'kolah." And it's probably the most often quote cited by women to their husbands, at least in the Jewish tradition. Rebekah, instead of appealing to her husband to heed her words, charges Jacob to do so. To Rebekah's mind, Isaac, who holds firm to his own interpretation of his children's destinies, will not hear her voice. Her only chance to be heard is through her son. So instead of direct confrontation, she uses stealth and boldly promises to assume Jacob's curse if things go awry. Those words of self-sacrifice become a prophecy self-fulfilled. Like Abraham, she sacrifices the relationship with her beloved son to guarantee the patriarchal blessing. Though Jacob is not cursed, rather the blessing is affirmed, we'll see that later, he lives the rest of his life estranged from his family. When he finally returns home after his sojourn in Haran, it is to bury his father, not his mother. After Jacob is forced to flee from the murderous intentions of his brother, he never sees her again. And it is at the behest of Rebekah that he is sent away. In yet another example of the matriarch's prophetic powers, she is told, Hugad, that Esau plots to murder Jacob. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him, and Esau said to himself, Belibo, in his heart, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I will kill my brother Jacob." And then it was told, Yugad, to Rebekah. She adjures Jacob to listen to her voice for a third time in order to save himself by fleeing to her brother in Haran. Yet for her husband, she concocts another cover story, knowing he is already sympathetic with her on the question of Esau's Hittite wives, who were a source of bitterness of spirit to Isaac and Rebekah. At this point, she again calls into question the meaning of her life. I loathe my life on account of those Hittite women. If Jacob should take a wife from the Hittite women such as these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? She says. Lama li chaim. But this time her plaintive why is directed to her husband, not to God. And this time Isaac picks up the clue, takes the rudder to steer the narrative back on track by sending Jacob to Padan Aram, to her relatives, in order to find an acceptable wife. At that moment, he bestows upon the true heir the patriarchal blessing of Abraham, in chapter 28, verses 1 through 5. All's well that ends well, or so it seems. In remaining behind, bereft of her beloved son, Rebekah becomes the recipient of a displaced curse. Given the consequences that this sacrifice entails, why does she resort to deception? Esther Fuchs argues that the biblical trope of feminine deceit and divine endorsement reinforces the patriarchal hierarchy and the stereotype of women as powerless. The fact is that Rebekah deceives Jacob. I'm quoting from Esther Fuchs. The fact is that Rebekah deceives Isaac not because she is a devious wife, but because legally she is inferior and subordinate to Isaac. Within biblical patriarchy, the institute of primogeniture and parental blessing applied strictly to males. Mothers could not give blessings to their children any more than daughters could receive them. Although the narrative presents the woman as a strong-willed character who outsmarts her husband and acts out her wishes, Rebekah is in fact as underprivileged as her son Jacob. Fuchs makes a cogent point, but it does not stand up to comparative scrutiny. Sarah has no compunction about correcting her husband's perception, while Rebekah does. Furthermore, God's endorsement of Rebekah's insight is also not direct, as it is in the story of Ishmael's banishment. Yet we know that God ultimately affirms Rebekah's manipulation of events, not only from the prophecy itself, but also because Isaac ratifies the blessing. I'm going to come back to that picture. Isaac ratifies the blessing. When Esau returns from the hunt and confronts his father with the truth, the patriarch does not withdraw his words, nor does he curse Jacob. Rather, seized with violent trembling, he declares, I blessed him. He shall again be blessed. Gam baruch yeh. What comes by feminine wiles is endorsed in the end as heaven sent by the patriarch himself. Yet why does God endorse the indirect route and not encourage Isaac to follow Rebekah's insight? Ramban, drawing on early mystical ideas, gestures at why Isaac could not know consciously whom he was blessing. In his commentary, he argues that the blessing had to be given over against Isaac's conscious will. I'm not going to read the commentary. You can read it yourself. According to Ramban, it was necessary to deceive Isaac for the blessing to be given over to the powers of heaven, since divine knowledge is beyond human ken. That is, Rebekah's use of subterfuge in order to guarantee that the blessing would come from God. She has to use deceit. Mortals cannot know his inscrutable ways. Only after being duped do they come to realize their limited perspective. In this reading, the blessing must be filtered through the patriarch's love of his son, Esau, whose identity Jacob assumes. Blessing entails a suspension of the conscious will through a deeply sensual, even erotic experience. I'm going to go back to this. Isaac listens intently to his voice, feels his arms, drinks the wine and eats the game brought to him. Yet only kissing after kissing Jacob, inspired by the scent of the animal's skins, does he break into blessing. Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Though Isaac does not really recognize who stands before him, he says, Hakol kol Yaakov vayadayim yadei Esav. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He remains, after the fact, unequivocally blessed. For the blind man, it is the love for his son and the experience of synesthesia, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling that inspire blessing, despite the dissonance of reason. And that's perhaps what he intends. Bavur tevarecha nafshi, that my soul, body may bless you. Yet Ramban's argument leaves out one primary player. What of Rebekah? And here the painter, Flink, has put Rebekah back in to the blessing. Does she know that Isaac must give over the blessing in this way? Perhaps this is precisely what she implies when she adds the phrase to Isaac's original words, so that your father might bless you in the presence of the Lord. Was Rebekah privy to esoteric understanding? Or did she resort to devious means because she was powerless to realign her husband's intentions directly? Ramban claims that she was an agent of God's will and couches her motivation in terms of feminine modesty. When she finds out that her husband was not privy to her insight, it is too late for her to correct him. Still, the question remains, why was their communication so oblique? Why was this strong, resourceful woman so intimidated by her husband? Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv of Volozhin, 19th century commentary on the Chumash, suggests that the communication gap between husband and wife can be traced back to their first meeting. Isaac was coming from the approach to Be'er Lechai Ro'i, for he was living in the Negev, and Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the turn of the evening. The passage opens with explicit geographical markers, a reference to Be'er Lechai Ro'i and the Negev. This recalls the scene of Hagar's first flight from the punitive hand of her mistress. And the sources are at the bottom of page 3 in your handout. There, an angel appeared to Hagar by a spring, Ain Hamayim, literally eye of water, urging her to return. And she called the Lord who spoke to her, "You are El Ro'i," literally, God who sees me, by which she meant, have I not gone on seeing after he saw me? Therefore the well was called Be'er Lechai Ro'i, the well of the living one who sees me. As an etiological narrative, the naming of the well expresses Hagar's exultant sense of having survived the divine sighting. The sacred locus is marked by images of opening. Here the scene takes place by a spring, an eye of water, Ain Hamayim, metonymic for the divine eye that sees her. The seeing God, El Ro'i, in her experience is identified as the one who sustains life, El Chai, in the naming of the well. This experience of asymmetry between the one who sees and grants life and the one who is seen and survives is repeated again in Isaac's life in the trauma of his binding at Mount Moriah, named also for divine sight. The Lord will see, Yud-Ke Vav-Ke Yir'eh. Echoing Abraham's own words, God will see to the sheep for a burnt offering. Both Hagar and Isaac experience a direct revelation. One on the threshold between sky and earth, bound to the mountain altar, the other on the threshold between water and earth, at a life spring in the ground. They have both been seen and survived the sighting. When Isaac first sees Rebekah, he is returning from Be'er Lahai, perhaps a place he frequents for prayer or meditation. It is the first time the reader has seen Isaac center stage since the traumatic scene of his binding, from which Abraham returned alone to his servants, going on with them to Be'er Sheva. We invoke the famous question, what happened to Isaac? Since the Akedah, he has been talked of and for by the patriarch and his servant in negotiating a match from Padan Aram, but he himself has been conspicuously absent until now, this moment of first meeting. He raised his eyes and saw, and behold, camels were coming. Rebekah raised her eyes and saw Isaac, and she alighted, or rather she fell, vatipol, from her camel. And she said to her servant, "Who is that man over there, mi ha'ish halazeh, walking through the field toward us?" The servant said, "That is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant recounted to Isaac all the things he had done. And Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother. And Isaac took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was consoled after the death of his mother. Unlike Some Enchanted Evening, where the hero's eyes meet the gaze of his beloved across a crowded room, the first meeting between Isaac and Rebekah reads like the opening of a comedy of errors. Melancholy, the patriarch is cast in the long shadows of early evening, in a meditative stroll, lost in his desert-dwelling mind. She is maudlin. The smell of camels in her nostrils and the grit of sand in her hair, fingers, and toes. There is no love at first sight. Their eyes do not meet, for he, marked by early myopia, sees the camels in the distance, while she sees him and falls, vatipol, from her camel. Most translations render the Hebrew vatipol as genteel, and she alighted, as if she's a lady descending from her steed. But how would a woman, unassisted, lightly descend from a camel a height of about 10 feet from the ground? No. She falls. And brushing the desert sand off, she rises and asks the servant to identify that man over there, ha'ish halazeh, walking towards them. When she realizes he is the one she is destined to marry, she veils herself, sealing the asymmetry of their first sight with a piece of cloth. Why does she fall from the camel? What does she see in Isaac that alarms her, sets her off balance? And why does she then veil herself? The Netziv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Berlin, suggests that she, upon seeing this man deeply engaged in prayer like a terrifying angel of God, falls from her camel, filled with fear and awe, though she does not know who he is. When she points to him, inquiring after his identity, she refers to him with the unusual demonstrative pronoun, halazeh, that one over there. According to the Netziv, the expression refers to a man who is threatening and suggests both distance of space and intimidation. The sons of Jacob point to Joseph as he approaches from a distance with the same expression, and they saw him from afar in Genesis 37, verse 18 and 19. And they said to each other, "Here comes that their dream master, Baal HaChalomot Halazeh." In fear and trembling, she points at him as if he is wholly other, shrouded in another world. The Netziv comments, "And so she took the veil and covered herself, out of a deep sense of shame and fear." I want to come back to this picture. If I don't get to it, I'll tell you. Out of a deep sense of shame and fear, as if she thought she was unworthy to be his wife. And from that moment onward, fear was imprinted in her heart. And she was not with Isaac as Sarah was with Abraham and Rachel was with Jacob. For when they had an issue with their husbands, they were not ashamed to speak directly to them, whereas this was not the case with Rebekah. This meeting then serves as an introduction to the next story in Parashat Toledot, where Isaac and Rebekah had a difference of opinion. Rebekah did not have the courage to present her thoughts to Isaac to discuss, though she knew the truth, that Esau only had the hunt in his mouth. Now, this is seen as a euphemism for being deceptive. Who's deceptive? And so at the moment of Isaac's blessing, God had intentions that the blessings would come precisely in this way to Jacob. That is, through deception. If Rebekah had been with her husband as Sarah and Rachel were with theirs, events would not have unfolded in this way. From the beginning, all things are under divine providence. Rebekah arrived at that precise moment, and as a result, became alarmed at the sight of Isaac, so that later events would transpire according to the divine will. This moment is prescient of the gap between husband and wife that would hold from that first meeting onward. Like the Ramban, the Netziv characterizes Rebekah as shrouded by her own modesty, who becomes a mere pawn in the divine game where the main players, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau, wrangle over blessing and birthright. Yet how could this woman who had been so strong, forthright, and hospitable at the well with the servant now be seized with such fear and trembling? She was absolutely sure of her own destiny in joining Abraham's family back in Haran. With her one word of consent, she allayed the fears that the servant had expressed to Abraham before he left. Perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me, lalechet acharai, to this land. When her brother and father, Bethuel and Lavan, asked whether she was willing to go, she answered simply, I will go, elech, echoing God's command to Abraham, go forth, lech lecha. While Abraham did so at the behest of God, Rebekah did so of her own free will. Furthermore, the blessing she received from her father and brother, may your descendants inherit the gates of their foes, echoes God's blessing to Abraham after the trial of the binding of Isaac. In leaving her family's home with this blessing and in guaranteeing the future of the promised seed, she becomes a genuine daughter of Abraham. Yet, as Tikva Frimerkensky points out, she seems to lose her sense of autonomy when she marries. I'm going to go back to this. All right. When she marries Isaac, she turns into a wife. She who left Mesopotamia as an autonomous person turned into a betrothed woman, taken by the servant, and then taken into her husband's domain. As soon as Isaac enters the scene, she veils herself. Nevertheless, Rebekah is Isaac's match. Isaac is Abraham's son, and Rebekah is Milcah's daughter, granddaughter, Terah's granddaughter. So they're related. They're both related on the paternal and maternal lines to Terah. So, as I suggested earlier, toledot Yitzchak is really a displaced toledot Avraham, guaranteed by Rebekah's agency. Frimerkensky suggests that while Isaac is promised land and progeny, the process of inheriting entails a passage from Abraham to Rebekah to Jacob and to the people of Israel. Her decisiveness, her strong will, and her embrace of her destiny make her strong active link between Abraham and Jacob. She is the link. The genealogy of Isaac passes to Jacob through Rebekah, who acts as Abraham's proxy. However, the veiling in this scene of first meeting is not necessarily a sign of modesty, fear, or shame, but rather a sign of power that goes underground, turns inward, and allies with the direct ways of the divine will. We now turn to the reverberations that Rebekah's veiling has had upon the Jewish way in love and marriage. The most intimate moment, and I want to go back to the first slide. This is taken from a friend's wedding, Julie Chayas, that I was privy to be at a year and a half ago. So we'll just meditate on this image. The most intimate moment of a traditional Jewish wedding occurs at the Bedekin, when the groom veils the bride before she is escorted to the wedding canopy, the chuppah. Rabbinic lore links the tradition to this scene of Rebekah's veiling, though the custom, widespread in the ancient Near East, predates the biblical period. It is a symbolic act, a gesture by which the groom claims his bride is exclusively his own. As he veils her, he is saying, "You are uniquely mine. I give you the gift of being holy in yourself, in intimacy with me alone." At that moment, she is drawn away from the public eye into a private realm where the features of her face are blurred, her mouth a crescent moon, her eyes but a flicker of light under the lace. He veils her in public so that he might unveil her privately in the consummation of their marriage. In the traditional ceremony, she is unveiled after the blessings have been sung, the veil lifted and the cup of wine brought to her lips. Symbolically, however, the real unveiling occurs in the cheder yichud, the private room to which the couple is taken after the ceremony. The veil then is metonymic for virginity, the unveiling for its loss. However, Rebekah's behavior in the scene of first sighting at Be'er L'Chayroi is unique as a symbol of betrothal in that she veils herself. She is the one setting the boundary between the private and public face. Jacques Sasson points out that, as in the Mari, Rebekah's veiling would signal betrothal, the actual marriage not occurring until Isaac makes her his wife. If so, what about the timing of the act? Why is Rebekah not veiled in Haran by the servant? Why did Isaac not veil his bride in the fields of Be'er L'Chayroi? Why does she only choose to cover up after her first sighting of that man and the identification of him by the servant as her husband? Ironically, rather than a symbol of the exclusive right of the groom to the bride, here the veiling signifies the murmurs of Rebekah's independence. In drawing the scarf down over her face, she maintains the asymmetry of sight at their first meeting. He raised his eyes, actually I want to go back to this image. He raised his eyes and saw camels coming. She raised her eyes and saw Isaac. And here I want you to think about, remember the sun is setting at Be'er L'Chayroi, and I want you to substitute, instead of these human figures in Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, I want you to think of camels in the distance, okay? So he raised his eyes and saw camels, and she raised her eyes and saw Isaac. The scarf become perhaps made of a gauzy material, porous to light, allows her to continue seeing the other while her face is obscured to him. It establishes a dynamic hide and seek. You can't see me, yet I can see you. The veiling anticipates the three acts in which Rebekah strikes out on her own, beyond the purview of her husband. In consulting God over the tumult in her belly, in disguising Jacob as Isaac to be blessed by the blind patriarch, and in concocting a cover story as to why the blessed son must now leave for Padan Aram. Call it duplicitous, call it subterfuge, call it feminine wile. In any case, the veiling appropriates a ubiquitous symbol of patriarchal power, the groom's unilateral taking of the bride as his own, and transforms it into a symbol of her autonomy. The veil gives her the gift of privacy, the ability to know an inner world wholly her own, free from the roving eye of the outside world and free of social norms. It opens the interior eye, and through the gauze, the blurring of lines, a crack of light breaks through. In the words of Leonard Cohen, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.